Hey everyone, it is late at night and I'm Norman. Tonight we're going to be looking at some more amazing watches that I've stumbled upon while I'm perusing eBay. As most of you know, I kind of use eBay as my social media. So I typically spend a decent amount of time each day going through my saved searches and whatnot, just seeing what's out there. And I've collected some pretty amazing looking watches that I've stumbled upon. So let's take a look at those. The first watch on my list is a vintage Junghans Max Bill watch. This watch has a tonneau-shaped case on it, and just look at that dial. In some pictures it almost looks like a tropical dial, that being a browning because it's aged, but in other shots it looks like it's actually a sunburst in brown. Either way, that dial looks absolutely phenomenal. And I've recently come to appreciate brown dials. So perfect. I love the stick hands on this watch as well as the batten markers. Even though the case doesn't really scream Bauhaus, that dial definitely does. And what's pretty crazy about this watch is look at that crown. That thing has lived a life. Crazy. Unfortunately, this watch is not available. It was sold for $162. Not bad at all. The case size on this watch is 32.5 millimeters, so it's a little fella. The lug width is 18 millimeters, and the crystal is acrylic. Next up, we have a vintage 1960s men's heritage jump hours. I'm actually a fan of jump hour watches. It's such a crazy, unique design and just kind of a fun complication, or means of telling time. On this watch, the seconds hand is really fun and it kind of gives it a one-hander aesthetic. I like the look of that wide minutes window down at the 6 o'clock. Although it almost looks like a weight scale. Does it tell time or does it tell me how heavy I am? And on this particular watch, I feel like the date window is just perfect for it. It fits right into the design of the watch and kind of complements the hours, which are below the 12 o'clock. It has an elegant case and the crown is kind of hidden a little bit on the side. This one is also no longer available. It sold for only $130. The case size is 35 millimeters. The lug width is 16 millimeters. It's kind of cool that there's a minutes track around the edge of the dial. I think in other jump hour watches, they're even more minimal than this, but this minutes track is kind of cool because it's almost negative space. So it's black, but then the markers themselves are the color of the dial itself. The crystal on this watch is acrylic because it's vintage. Next up, I have a vintage Pierre Armand AS 1686. This watch is gorgeous. I love the font on the dial. And from what I can see in pictures, the dial itself is almost a mirrored finish. It appears to slope down on the edges almost like a pie pan dial. The applied batten markers look great. I love the hands. They are showing a bit of age, but they look great. That seconds hand is kind of unique, and again, that font is just so cool. Absolutely retro future sci-fi, just great. Unfortunately, the movement inside this watch appears to be kind of rough. It looks almost like there's some rust spots on it. So whoever ends up with this watch, it would be a good idea to send it in for servicing just to be sure, because that looks a little bit rough there. There's quite a bit of discoloration on a couple of the wheels. And this watch is currently available at the time of making this video. The case size is 34 millimeters. The lug to lug is 40 millimeters. I always appreciate it when people fill out their listings with complete specs on their watches. The case height is 10 millimeters, the lug width is 18 millimeters, the crystal is acrylic, and it's currently a buy now listing for $165. Next up, we have a vintage Hamilton cross-country multi-time zone watch. This watch has a super cool multi-time zone feature to it. You can see it on the center of the dial there, where it calls out different time zones. So at a glance, you can see what time it is in other locations in the US. These watches have a great tuxedo / pull routery aesthetic to them because of the light colored band around the edge of the dial. The case design on it is beautiful, and the crown is snugly inset in there. It looks kind of small. I'm not sure how tough that would be to use, but it looks like the crown does stick up above the case, so it's almost like just a crown guard. So maybe you can get to the crown pretty easily, even though it's tucked into the case. The case size is 34 millimeters. The lug to lug is 41 millimeters. The crystal is acrylic. And unfortunately, this watch is no longer available. It sold for $820. Next up, I have a vintage Omax Spaceman watch. I love Spaceman watches so much. I really need to get one sometime. These watches are so much fun. It would probably sit on the shelf most of the time, but it would look so good sitting there. I love how the watch itself looks like the cockpit of a spaceship. The way they did the crystal and just the overall aesthetic of this whole thing, not to mention the font that's on the dial. Oh, Spacemans are super cool. I've never seen one in person, but I mean, they've got to be amazing. And I feel like the price tag for them isn't too terrible. I mean, this one is no longer available. The listing was ended, but it was listed at $280. So they're not $100 and some cheap, but it was under $300. The case on these is 37 millimeters. The lug to lug is 39 millimeters. Now on this listing, it said that the lug width was 39 millimeters. I don't think that was correct. Pretty sure they meant lug to lug. I mean, that would be pretty crazy to have a lug width that's wider than the watch itself. Next up, I have a vintage Benrus automatic watch. This watch is absolutely gorgeous, and look at the shape that it's in. The hands look a little bit aged, but that dial is in such great shape. It's so clean and minimal and just gorgeous. I love the markers on this watch, and the text that's on there is pretty cool with those 3 stars. And white really isn't a color that I personally would choose for a strap, but this watch looks so good on a white strap. It's crazy. The case size is 34 millimeters. The lug to lug is 41 millimeters. The lug width is 18 millimeters. The crystal is acrylic. And this watch sold for $115. I mean, the price tags on these watches have been really great. And the last watch that I have is another Benrus and another jump hour watch. The dial on this watch is so much fun. I love the star shape in the center of it. I think it might rotate like a seconds hand. I'm not entirely sure. The horizontal single crosshair line on the dial looks really cool, and it appears that above that line there's texture on the dial and below it it's smooth. Super unique and fun. And this watch also has a wider minutes window on it, which is just super cool. I feel like I definitely should get a jump hour watch at some point. Unfortunately, this listing didn't have a whole lot of details as far as the specifications of the watch go. And also, unfortunately, it is no longer available. This watch ended up selling for $227. So there you have it, some amazing watches that I found on eBay. So cool. And in the future, when I uncover other brilliant watches, I'll be sure to share those with you. Thanks for watching.